morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone, and welcome back to Adobe Live. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior Design Evangelist here at Adobe, and hope you're all doing well on this Wednesday morning, afternoon, or evening. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat. We've got some amazing people, but I want to dive straight into today's challenge. We have a lot of fun stuff that we want to cover today, and like a typical designer that I am, I started working on this a few days ago in anticipation for this challenge. And last night I was feeling pretty good about it. I'm like, we're going to design this really cute Father's Day style card, with an image that we're going to generate, and there's a text at the bottom. And then I woke up this morning and I'm like, no, we're going to redesign the entire thing an hour before my stream. Because that's what I do. That's what designers do. We're crazy like that. We're all unhinged. So we're going to design something completely different from what you're seeing here, but it's going to be a lot of fun. So go ahead and open up Photoshop, and we're going to start a new document. Now, if I select the right screen, we can probably do that, right? Command N, or under the File menu, you'll be able to start a new document. And we're going to do 1200 by 1600. Now, this particular document is for digital only, right? So we're not going to be printing it, but if you are going to be printing it, then you might want to, bump up the resolution to 250 or 300. Somewhere in that range will give you something nice and crispy, but we're only going to be delivering it over email or whatever it might be, WhatsApp, all the apps that we use, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create. So now we have this blank document, wonderful blank canvas to start our design on. And what I want to do first, we're going to start very simple with a background. Now, of course, we could, grab a color over here to the left, and we could choose, I don't know, let's say this color right about here. Looks like a nice color, right? If I hold down my Alt or Option key and press Delete, it's going to fill with my foreground color. Command or Control Delete will fill with your background color. Fun little pro tip, right? So that looks fine, but I'm thinking I might want a gradient. I might also want something that looks like it's kind of like we have a surface going on, right? So maybe the foreground is a little bit lighter than the background, right? So I'm going to keep my foreground color. Maybe I'll bump it up a little bit, right? And then the background color, I want to sample that color and then just bring this down a touch. Somewhere in this range here. So we have two very similar colors, but one's a little bit lighter than the other. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to grab our gradient tool, shortcut key G, or you can find it on the left in your tools. And then at the top, I want to select foreground to background, which is under basics. And now I can simply go ahead, if I have the right gradient selected, I was experimenting with other things earlier, but we want a linear gradient, right? And we can simply drag on our canvas. And as of a few updates ago, we now have these live gradient things going on, which is really fun, right? So we might want something like that. And it almost looks like we have a surface, right? The foreground's almost like maybe a table, and the background might be a wall. And we're going to have an object right here in the center that's going to help kind of distract us from that gradient in the background, that kind of transition. So, definitely tweak with that or ignore it. No one saw it, right? All right. What's going to go in the foreground? Well, I'm thinking this is going to be like a very minimalistic, almost like a movie poster. And since it's Father's Day, a lot of dads, sort of myself, have a mustache. Mine's not very extravagant and fancy, but I'm going to go ahead and hop over to Safari, and I'm here in Adobe Firefly. And what I want to generate is a mustache, but not just any mustache, because we can just type in a mustache, whoop-de-doo, right? But I want to generate, I'm actually going to copy my prompt so I don't waste too much time. And we're going to generate something like this, a wide angle product shot of a mustache made of blue fur, isolated on a blue background with studio lighting. Now, if you want to get more information about how to do things like this, I do have a new YouTube channel, youtube.com/@learnfirefly. You can learn all sorts of fun things like this, including isolated images, which I just covered. So I'm going to go ahead and generate. And what we should get is what we described, right? A product shot of what is a product shot of a mustache? I don't know, but we're about to find out. But we're trying to get that mustache isolated on a blue. I mean, look at this. That's cool, right? We can also experiment with different aspect ratios, landscape, but we can also add in a style reference. So if there's a specific fur that we wanted, let's say this fur here, which I also generated using Firefly, I can just drag this into our style reference. maybe keep the strength somewhere in the middle, and then generate one more time. And we're gonna see what happens. Again, we should get something that looks like our original result, but hopefully a little bit furrier based on the style reference that we added. Ooh, okay, now we're getting somewhere, right? This looks wonderful. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And by the way, if anyone out there wants to grow a mustache like this, I would love to see that. But anyways, so we have our mustache. We can go ahead and download it, or we can copy it directly to our clipboard, which is wonderful. Or you can add it directly to a Creative Cloud library. But if you hop over back to Photoshop, I can paste it. It's a pretty large file, so I'm gonna go ahead and reduce the size. Again, I want it somewhat minimalistic, so it's not gonna be a massive mustache. And we can start the process of removing the background using the remove background feature. Now, because this is I haven't pressed it yet, but because this is a very hairy object, right? It may not do a great job initially, but let's see what happens. And it's thinking, and it's a very complex object, apparently. Or we might just get a crash, which could be fun. As you can see, it was a little bit complex. The hairs, a little difficult, right? But what we can do is we can hop into, with our layer mask selected over here to the right, we can hop into select and mask. And this will allow us, we could go ahead and press the refine hair button at the top, which does a decent job, but we could also use over here to the left, the refine edge brush tool. So I can use it just like a brush and kind of paint around the outside of this particular mustache, and it's gonna just refine those hairs, which it does an okay job, right? Especially when you have hair or fur, take your time and really figure this out, right? Experiment with the different settings. But we also have some settings over here to the right, so we can shift the edge a little bit. We can maybe feather it just a touch, and feathering is nice for the example because we had some out of focus areas over here to the left, right? And then we can also decontaminate colors. And this, I think, haven't pressed it yet, I think this is gonna take this to the next level because, we have a background. There was a lot of dark going on back there, but there's also very distinct color, these whites and these blues. So if I press this, we should see, aha, much better. And then you can combine that, of course, with things like the refinement brush. And now we have a much better looking output, right? Down here, probably not what you want to do, right? But there's a lot of things that you can do in that area to kind of fix that. But I don't want to waste too much time. I'm going to press OK, which is going to apply this as a new layer with a layer mask. And now we have our lovely little mustache. But, looking at this, it looks fine. I would definitely make some changes. We do have a layer mask applied, so I can dive in and use a brush and kind of touch that up a little bit. But it's kind of just floating here. It doesn't look like it's on this surface that we created. So what I want to do is I want to create a few new layers right below it. So I'm going to grab my elliptical marquee tool right here over to the left. You could also use a shape if you wanted to, and simply draw out something like this. And you can hold down your spacebar as you drag to move it around before you accept it. So we'll do something like this. And I'm going to fill this. I'm going to create a new layer. Boop, just like that. And I want to fill this with black. Boop. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, Alt Option and delete. So now we have sort of a shadow, possibly. Although it doesn't look like a shadow, right? It just looks like a circle. Now, what I want to do a few things. I want to blur this circle, and I want to apply a layer mask so I can transition it a little bit. So under the filter menu, I'm going to start by converting it into a smart object, just so I am preserving the original pixels of this particular shape. And now what I want to do is under the filter menu, down to blur, I'm going to choose Gaussian blur. Maybe I'll blur it a little bit, somewhere in the 6 range. Of course, depending on the size of your document, you might need bigger, you might need smaller. And then I want to apply a layer mask down here at the bottom, and this will allow me to paint or gradient black and white. Anything black will be hidden, white will be visible. So I'm going to grab my gradient tool, and I want to do foreground to transparent. Black is my foreground color. I'm simply going to start in this area here and transition it out. Right? Now, that's looking a little bit better. Still a bit strange though, it's a bit too harsh, right? So within my layers panel, I'm going to set the blend mode to something like soft light. And there we go. We're starting to kind of move it in the direction that we want. It's not as harsh. Another thing you can possibly do is experiment with, different blend modes, or just set it at normal, and then maybe just drop the opacity. That doesn't look bad, actually. Somewhere around 40%. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm holding down Alt-Option and dragging it over to the right. So now I have two shadows in place. So now it looks like it's kind of sitting on this surface, which is looking a little bit better. All right, so now we have our mustache. I'm going to make sure to group my objects just so that no one yells at me in the chat. Command and Control G, and I'll call this mustache. I mustache you a question. All right, and this I can name background. And now we can move on to text, because obviously any card, any movie poster needs some sort of text. What I want to do, I want to start with the actual highlight text. So I'm thinking down here, we might want something that says like best dad, right? But kind of like a shadow almost coming off the mustache. So if I grab my text tool, shortcut key T, I'm going to type out best dad. Now, obviously this typeface here is probably not what we're looking for. I might want something like maybe dimension is a fun typeface, right? Something nice and big and bold, something like this. And if you don't have any fancy typefaces, I would encourage you, head on over to fonts.adobe.com. Go to the browse section. You can look up all sorts of different typefaces. You can even put in your preview, best dad, so you can really get a sense of what the text is going to look like before you go ahead and add it to your Creative Cloud library, right? Or your Creative Cloud account. It's going to automatically sync over to Photoshop. But I've gone ahead and add some text, maybe make it a little bigger. But what I'm thinking here is it'd be kind of cool if this text kind of went into perspective. So it started in the mustache area, kind of came out and maybe faded away, almost like a shadow, right? So if I were to grab my transform tool, and if I were to it's not going to work, right? What I want to do is I want to bring this point in and this point in, but it's text, so I can't do that right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this first into a smart object, just like I did before. And now I can start that process of moving these points in. So I went into the transform tool, Command and Control T, and then I'm holding down my points with the Command key and just dragging them in, right? So I can move this up a little bit towards the mustache, maybe move these in, move these out. Maybe I'll move it all the way down here. Let's see what that looks like. All right, interesting, right? Interesting. I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I also don't hate it, which is a good thing. We're halfway there, right? But again, like our issue earlier, it's very harsh. So what I want to do is I want to do a few things. First thing I want to do, because we've already converted it into a smart object, blur, Gaussian blur. Now, I don't want to overdo the blur here, right? Very important. If we were to overdo the blur, you can't see what it says, which defeats the entire purpose. So I want to just have a nice subtle blur, maybe somewhere in the 4 range, press OK, and then I do want this to fade out. So layer mask, just like we did before, grab the gradient tool, make sure you're at foreground to transparent, and fade that out a little bit. Something in that range there. And finally, just like before, the shadow's a bit harsh, so experiment with blend modes. Either something like soft light, which kind of gives it kind of brings in the colors from the background a little bit, which isn't bad, but it kind of goes against our other shadow. So again, experiment in that area, or you can simply just drop the opacity somewhere in the 25 range, right? Obviously, in this particular case, it might be a bit difficult to read, so experiment with different things. Another thing that's really nice is because we're using smart objects, we can simply double click inside here and edit our text if we wanted to. So if we wanted it maybe italic, right? We can do that. If we wanted something a little bit thinner, which I wouldn't recommend in this particular case, or a different typeface, right? We've got something like fit, which is very similar to the typeface that we were using a second ago. So you can definitely do that. So everything is not lost. All those pixels are preserved. All right, so we've got that looking pretty decent. There would, switching back here, I would definitely make some changes to the mustache, but I do want to add some additional text. Maybe at the top here of this movie poster, we might want a quote. So I'm going to grab, once again, my text tool, shortcut key T, and type out, let's say, easily the best dad in the world. in the world, right? Something like that. Now, what I would say, if I change this text to white, is this typeface that we were using for the, I guess it would be the title of this movie poster or card, it's probably not the best typeface to use for longer text, right? Just hard to read. So what I want to do is I'm going to use something like Lust Display, which is a fun typeface. Maybe I'll make sure this is centered. Center it here. And then definitely we're going to bring this down. Let's try 36. Nope. Let's try 48. You can also use the transform tool and just much easier, right? Fancy. Even this, I would say, this is definitely a more fancier display typeface. Even this is a little bit difficult to read at times. So I would maybe dial this back even more, but we're going to leave it for now. And then maybe underneath, we might want maybe stars. There's movie posters has star ratings on it sometimes. A little cheesy for a card like this, but you know what? Let's run with it. So I'm going to grab my polygon tool from the left. Let's draw out our first star. Maybe we'll change this to white. And I love the fact that we have our contextual taskbar down here at the bottom, and a lot of the controls are now right here. So you don't have to find your properties panel. Some people don't even have it open over here. So I can just dive in here, maybe change the star ratio, maybe set the number of sides to 5. That's not looking terrible. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now, of course, we want 5 of these, right? Let me make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to duplicate Command and Control J. Why J? I have no idea, but it is what it is, right? And then as I'm moving this around, you're going to notice, it snaps to let me know that they are perfectly spaced apart. And I'm going to make sure to group these, Command and Control G. Whoops, wrong shortcut. There we go. Stars, yay. And then maybe underneath we might want, where this star rating exactly came from. So text tool one more time, and we'll just do something like the Pinskys, because my family rated me the best dad. Not biased at all, right? There we go. Beautiful. Maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller. 30. Yeah. And then this entire group can be duplicated over to the other side. That one random dude. Why not? All right, so we've got our star ratings. I'm actually going to select both of these groups. And then if I go ahead and group these together. No apostrophe. Oh, no. You're probably right? This is why I'm a designer and not a copywriter. All right, there we go. And then maybe right down here, we might want something like the name of the person, in this case, Howard Pinsky. And then stars in. And I can just kind of finesse these into place. Something like that. Oops, did I get it? There we go. Make sure to group keep putting the wrong shortcut. Group, and then I'll just name this Howard, make sure everything's centered. That looks good. And there we go. And just like that, we've started the process of creating our movie poster. Maybe down at the bottom, just to kind of wrap things up one more time. Maybe down here, I'll put the date. What's the date for Father's Day? I think it's like June 16th or something. June 16. Make this a little bit larger. All right. And then now this one, what I might want to add is like, sometimes movie posters will be like in theaters only or whatever it might be, right? So I might want to put something like where I'm going to be, likely at Chili's or a golf course. Now I'm thinking for this subheader down here at the bottom, this text is probably too large. So if I were to drop this to maybe, let's say 24, right, as a nice subheader, what you're going to notice is if I place this down here, that serif typeface, that display typeface that I was using, at smaller sizes is just very difficult to see. So I'm thinking, I might want to just kind of break with the serif typeface and just go for something a little bit more simple. Maybe Avenir, possibly. Avenir next heavy or bold, something like that, just so it's a little bit easier to read at the bottom. And this will be the date, keep everything nice and organized, which I rarely do, but because I'm on stream, everything's gonna be organized, right? Something like that. And now we have our completed movie poster, right? And you can do all sorts of things with, you can add additional elements, you can add who knows what else, right? And if you wanted to kind of take advantage of the Firefly generation that I showed off earlier, I can go back here. Instead of a mustache, let me actually get rid of the fur. And I might want to just do something like maybe a product shot of maybe a hanging blue tie or necktie, right? Isolated on maybe a white background to make it very easy to extract. Probably don't need studio lighting in this particular case. And maybe we'll change the aspect ratio to portrait. So, things like this are very easy to customize directly in Firefly so you get the exact output that you're looking for. And the reason I put hanging blue necktie in this particular case is because what I found, at least on Firefly, is if you don't include the word hanging, so that, the tie is like hanging from whatever it might be, it gives you a rolled up tie. So these are things you have to experiment with, but then you can use this and you can copy this to your clipboard if you needed to. Copy image, hop over to Photoshop again. Maybe I'll paste it here. And then very easily, this one is going to be a lot easier. I can just remove the background. There we go. And then we can have a tie, right? So maybe instead of the mustache, you can have a tie kind of hanging from your design, whatever it might be. You can also bring this directly, if you don't want to use Photoshop or you don't have Photoshop, you can also bring this directly into Adobe Express. Hold on, there we go. Right, open up in Adobe Express so you can, use it in a template over there. So you can make some, fun Father's Day stuff very easily. Now, one more thing I want to showcase before we wrap things up is, sometimes you just might want to generate an image of a person. And it's kind of what I was originally getting at inside of Photoshop here. Let me delete this tie. Let me go back. I like the mustache, right? This is kind of what I was getting at here. If you want to just generate a pretty generic image of maybe a father or a kid or whatever it might be, and you don't want to use an actual person for privacy reasons or whatever it might be, you can do that on Firefly. So I can go down here, maybe a portrait of a happy father with a kid on his back. And we'll just start with that. We'll see what happens. Now, you can take this in a photo direction. You can take it in an artistic direction. You can really kind of experiment to get the exact output that you are looking for. And that's not bad. The hands are a little bit wonky. Hands are always a problem in AI stuff. But I'm thinking for this one, maybe more in an artistic direction. So I can choose art. And then down at the bottom, we have all these different effects you can choose. So themes, we have something like splash images, right? And maybe I'll want maybe portrait for this particular example. And of course, you can also add things inside of the prompt. So if you wanted to add in like oil painting or specific colors or whatever it might be, right? You can definitely do that down in the prompt. There we go. That's looking kind of fancy. And you can use these directly in your Photoshop documents. You could bring them to Adobe Express, whatever it is that you might want. But I think that's about it. So let me go back over to Photoshop just to kind of go over what we did. And this is the final result. So we started with a pretty simple document. 1200 by 1600, of course, you can customize the size. Maybe we can make it portrait, landscape, whatever it might be. We added a very simple gradient in the background using the gradient tool. And what's really nice is, it's all saved over here in your layers panel. So I can just grab my gradient tool, and if after the fact, I can adjust it. So if I found that it was a little bit too harsh in the background, which it was, I just pull that up, and that's looking quite a bit better actually. And what's really nice is, all of these layers that we edited, when we remove the background, the layer mask is there. So if we wanted to make some changes to the colors or whatever it might be, we can add an adjustment layer down at the bottom. Now, if I were to simply add that adjustment layer and then start changing the color, you notice everything changes. Everything below it changes. But I might want just the mustache to change. So right here in the layers panel, I can either right click and then create clipping mask, which is down here at the bottom, or hold down my Alt or Option key, hover in between and click. Now it's only going to apply to the mustache, right? So I can change this to maybe a hot pink mustache. Yeah, just adds a nice bit of contrast to this. Ooh, I like that actually. That's kind of fun. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there because that's just the perfect place to end this. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in today. Stick around, we have a lot more content coming up, and I will see you all next time.